How does a nation win a war in the air without ever being seen in the skies? How can victory be forged far from the roar of engines and the flash of anti-aircraft fire? As you listen, leave a comment answering this question. Do wars are decided more by bravery or by production? From the moment the United States entered the Second World War, a transformation began that few civilians fully understood at the time. While newspapers focused on dogfights over Europe and bombing raids deep into enemy territory, another battle was unfolding quietly across the American continent. It was not fought with machine guns or bombs, but with steel, aluminum, blueprints, and human coordination on a scale never seen before. This hidden struggle would determine whether the Allied air forces could survive losses that, on paper, should have broken them. If this story makes sense to you so far, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation helps keep stories like this alive and visible. By the end of 1941, American leaders understood a brutal truth about modern warfare. Airplanes were being destroyed faster than traditional production methods could replace them. Every mission over occupied Europe meant aircraft lost to enemy fighters, mechanical failure, or ground fire. In earlier wars, such losses might have forced commanders to slow operations or retreat. This time, the response was different. Instead of asking how to lose fewer planes, planners asked how to build more, many more, faster than the enemy could destroy them. Across the United States, factories that once produced automobiles, refrigerators, and agricultural equipment were repurposed almost overnight. Assembly lines were redesigned to handle fuselages instead of car frames, wings instead of doors, engines instead of household motors. Entire cities shifted their daily rhythms to match production schedules that ran day and night. Workers, many of whom had never seen an airplane up close, became specialists in riveting, wiring, and precision assembly within weeks. This industrial surge was not chaotic. It was carefully coordinated by federal agencies that synchronized raw material extraction, transportation, and final assembly. Aluminum from Western mines, rubber from overseas supply chains, and steel from Midwestern mills flowed toward aircraft plants in a constant stream. Railroads were reorganized so that engines, propellers, and armaments arrived exactly when needed, reducing delays to a minimum. Every hour saved meant another aircraft reaching the front sooner. What made this system truly revolutionary was its logic of replacement. Military planners accepted aircraft losses as inevitable and planned production around that assumption. If a bomber group lost several planes during a mission, replacements were already in various stages of completion back home. Some were on assembly lines, others in testing hangars, others already being ferried toward operational bases. The loss of one plane triggered no panic, because another was already taking its place. Training centers multiplied alongside factories. Pilots, mechanics, and ground crews were prepared in parallel with aircraft production. New planes did not sit idle waiting for crews. Crews were waiting for planes. This synchronization ensured that the flow from factory to battlefield never stopped. It was an air network, not defined by flight paths, but by logistics, timing, and relentless repetition. While German and Japanese intelligence focused on counting aircraft deployed at the front, they struggled to grasp the depth of this system. They saw squadrons destroyed, yet months later, the enemy returned with even greater numbers. What they could not see were the endless rows of half-finished airframes, the warehouses of spare parts, and the training fields filled with fresh crews preparing to take over the skies. Do you think this kind of invisible preparation matters more than battlefield tactics? Leave your perspective in the comments as we continue. As the war intensified, this silent air network began to prove its true power. Losses mounted, but instead of shrinking, Allied air strength kept expanding. Each month brought more aircraft into service than the month before. Behind every combat report was an unseen response already in motion, setting the stage for what would come next. The scale of this expansion became impossible to ignore by 1942. Airfields across Britain, North Africa, and later the Pacific were receiving aircraft in numbers that reshaped entire campaigns. Bombers arrived not as isolated reinforcements, but in waves, filling newly built runways almost as fast as crews could prepare them for missions. Fighters followed the same rhythm, replacing losses with newer models that often outperformed those they replaced. At the heart of this system was a radical idea: standardization. Aircraft designs were simplified where possible, not to reduce effectiveness, but to accelerate production. Components were made interchangeable, allowing parts built in one factory to fit seamlessly into airframes assembled hundreds of miles away. This meant that a delay in one location did not paralyze the entire chain. The network adapted, rerouted, and kept moving forward. The human dimension of this effort was just as decisive. Millions of Americans entered the workforce to support aircraft production. Women filled factory floors in unprecedented numbers, mastering complex mechanical tasks with speed and precision. Older workers returned from retirement, teenagers learned specialized skills, and entire communities reorganized their lives around shift schedules and production quotas. The war reached into daily life not through ration cards alone, but through the constant hum of machinery and the shared knowledge that every completed aircraft mattered. Testing and delivery were integrated into the same relentless rhythm. New planes did not linger in hangars waiting for approval. Once assembled, they were immediately tested, certified, and handed over to ferry pilots who transported them across continents. Routes were mapped across the United States, through Canada, over the Atlantic, and into forward bases. Each flight was another link in the invisible chain connecting factory floors to combat zones. This speed changed how commanders thought about risk. Missions that once seemed too costly became acceptable because replacement was no longer uncertain. Strategic bombing campaigns intensified, not because losses disappeared, but because losses no longer meant collapse. The industrial network absorbed damage the way armor absorbs impact, dispersing shock across a vast system that remained functional. Enemy forces noticed the effect without fully understanding its source. German pilots reported facing ever-increasing numbers of bombers, escorted by fighters that seemed to appear endlessly. Anti-aircraft units claimed kills, only to find the skies filled again days later. The war in the air became a war of endurance, and endurance now favored the side that could replace what was lost fastest. Behind closed doors, Allied leaders recognized that air superiority was no longer just a tactical achievement, it was a structural advantage. Even if a single battle went poorly, the overall balance continued to shift. The silent air network ensured continuity, resilience, and momentum, qualities no single squadron could provide on its own. As aircraft technology advanced, the network adapted. New models entered production without halting output. Assembly lines were modified while still running, introducing improvements incrementally rather than waiting for perfect designs. This meant that pilots often received planes that were not only replacements, but upgrades, subtly shifting the balance with each delivery. What do you think mattered more at this stage of the war? Technological innovation or the ability to mass-produce existing designs? Share your thoughts as we move forward. By the time Allied forces prepared for the largest air operations of the conflict, the silent system behind them was operating at full strength, ready to sustain losses on a scale the world had never witnessed before, and still keep the skies filled. The true test of this system arrived when the air war reached its most punishing phase. In 1943, bombing campaigns over occupied Europe intensified dramatically. Daylight missions faced dense fighter opposition and increasingly sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses. Losses were heavy, sometimes shocking in scale, yet the flow of aircraft to forward bases did not slow. Instead, it accelerated. Every damaged or destroyed plane triggered a response that had been planned months earlier. Replacement airframes were already moving through factories, engines were already mounted, and crews were already training for aircraft they had not yet seen. The network functioned less like a series of individual factories and more like a single vast organism, reacting instantly to wounds without conscious decision-making. Logistics became a form of strategy. New airfields were constructed with speed that mirrored aircraft production itself. Runways appeared in the English countryside, in the deserts of North Africa, and later across liberated territories. Each airfield was another node in the silent network, extending its reach closer to enemy industrial centers. Aircraft did not merely arrive, they were absorbed, deployed, and replaced in a continuous cycle. The psychological impact of this endurance was profound. Allied aircrews knew the risks they faced, but they also understood that their missions were part of something larger and unstoppable. The loss of a plane was tragic, but it did not feel futile. There was confidence that the effort would continue, that the pressure on the enemy would not ease because of temporary setbacks. On the opposing side, the effect was corrosive. German industry struggled to match the pace, not only because of limited resources, but because production sites themselves were under constant attack. Factories were dispersed, hidden, or rebuilt after bombings, yet output never fully recovered. Each Allied mission damaged not just physical infrastructure, but the enemy's ability to replace what was lost in the air. The contrast was stark. One side replaced aircraft faster than combat could destroy them. The other fought a losing race against time, resources, and relentless pressure. Air superiority emerged not from a single decisive battle, but from thousands of production decisions made far from the front lines. As the network matured, efficiency reached extraordinary levels. Downtime between aircraft completion and combat deployment shrank to days, sometimes hours. Maintenance crews learned to cannibalize damaged planes to keep others flying, knowing replacements were already on the way. Nothing was wasted. Every rivet, every engine component, every trained mechanic was part of a system designed to endure. This approach reshaped how the war was fought. Strategic planning assumed continuity. Operations were scheduled weeks ahead, with confidence that the necessary air power would be available. The question was no longer whether the Allies could sustain air operations, but how intensely they chose to apply them. Do you believe morale in war depends more on hope or on certainty? The certainty created by this invisible system would soon support operations that demanded absolute commitment. As preparations began for the most ambitious offensives of the war, the silent air network stood ready, not as a background element, but as the foundation upon which everything else depended, carrying the conflict toward its decisive phase. As the war moved closer to its turning point, the silent air network revealed its most decisive characteristic: predictability. Not predictability in outcomes, but in capacity. Allied commanders could plan operations of unprecedented scale because they no longer feared sudden shortages. Aircraft numbers were not estimates. They were projections grounded in production schedules that had already proven reliable under pressure. This confidence reshaped major strategic decisions. Large-scale air operations were no longer calculated around conservation, but around dominance. Bombing campaigns expanded in duration and intensity, stretching across weeks instead of days. Fighter escorts grew more numerous, pushing deeper into enemy territory and reducing losses that once seemed unavoidable. Each adjustment was supported by the same unseen guarantee: whatever was lost would be replaced. Behind this assurance was an intricate web of coordination. Factories adjusted output based on frontline demand. Training programs expanded or contracted in response to operational tempo. Supply routes adapted to new theaters of war as the Allies advanced. When airfields shifted forward, the network shifted with them, extending itself seamlessly across oceans and continents. The Pacific theater offered a striking demonstration of this flexibility. Vast distances and hostile environments challenged every aspect of air operations. Yet even there, aircraft flowed steadily toward island bases carved out of jungles and coral. Losses to combat, weather, and mechanical failure were absorbed without disrupting the broader campaign. The system did not rely on proximity, it relied on continuity. This continuity affected technological evolution as well. New aircraft models were introduced not as isolated breakthroughs, but as upgrades folded into existing production lines. Pilots arriving at bases often discovered that their replacement aircraft was faster, better armed, or more resilient than the one they had lost. Progress did not pause the war effort, it moved alongside it. The enemy felt the weight of this imbalance increasingly. Every effort to contest the skies demanded resources that could not be replaced at the same rate. Experienced pilots became irreplaceable losses. Fuel shortages, limited training. Factories struggled to recover under constant attack. The contrast was no longer subtle, it was overwhelming. For the Allies, air superiority became less a question of winning and more a question of maintaining pressure. The network ensured that pressure could be sustained indefinitely. Even catastrophic losses failed to disrupt the overall trajectory. The air war had become asymmetrical, favoring the side whose strength lay not only in combat, but in endurance. This reality set the stage for the final phase of the conflict. Operations that depended entirely on air dominance were no longer theoretical. They were planned with the assumption that the skies would remain filled, protected, and replenished. The silent air network had transformed possibility into certainty. As the war approached its climax, one question remained unresolved. If victory in the air was built on the ground, what did that mean for how wars would be fought in the future? That answer would emerge as the conflict reached its conclusion, revealing the lasting legacy of a system that never fired a shot, yet decided the fate of the skies. By the final years of the war, the silent air network had become so effective that it was no longer noticed by those it supported. Aircraft arrived as expected, crews rotated as planned, and losses, however painful, no longer threatened collapse. What had once been an emergency response had evolved into a permanent structure of modern warfare. As Allied forces advanced across Europe and the Pacific, the skies remained filled. Air superiority was not a temporary advantage seized in a single campaign. It was a constant condition. The enemy's ability to contest the air diminished steadily, not because courage disappeared, but because replacement became impossible. Planes could not be built, pilots could not be trained, and fuel could not be secured at a pace that matched the relentless output of American industry. This imbalance accelerated the end of the war. Ground offensives advanced under the protection of overwhelming air cover. Supply lines were severed, communications disrupted, and industrial centers rendered inoperative. Each success reinforced the same principle. The war in the skies had been decided long before the final battles, in factories and logistics hubs thousands of miles from the front. When peace finally arrived, the system did not vanish. Its lessons reshaped military planning for decades to come. Nations understood that future conflicts would not be won solely by superior weapons or heroic pilots, but by the capacity to sustain force over time. Industrial strength, logistics, and coordination became as vital as tactics and bravery. The legacy of this silent network extended beyond warfare. Techniques developed for rapid aircraft production influenced civilian aviation, manufacturing, and global logistics. Assembly line efficiency, standardization, and synchronized supply chains became foundations of the modern industrial world. Looking back, it becomes clear that the decisive battles of the Second World War were not always visible. While pilots fought high above the clouds, another struggle unfolded on the ground, unseen but unstoppable. It was a battle of numbers, timing, and endurance, fought without gunfire, yet decisive in its outcome. So consider this as you reflect on the history of the conflict. When we speak of victory in the air, are we truly speaking of battles won in the sky, or of systems built in silence far below? Leave your thoughts in the comments and continue the conversation. The story of the silent air network reminds us that power is not always loud, and that sometimes the forces that change history are the ones that operate quietly, replacing what is lost faster than destruction can keep up, and shaping the future without ever being seen.